The night he was forced out, no one noticed the sound his life made as it broke. There was no shouting, no public disgrace, no dramatic confrontation, only a quiet walk through a dim hallway, a cardboard box held tight against his chest, and the heavy realization that everything he had built was slipping away without a single person standing beside him. The doors closed behind him softly, almost politely, but that silence screamed louder than any insult ever could. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the power of quiet strength, take a moment right now to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that touch the soul. He had given years of his life to that place. Early mornings when the city was still asleep, late nights when the lights burned long after everyone else had gone home, weekends sacrificed without complaint. He believed hard work spoke for itself. He believed loyalty was noticed. He believed that if you kept your head down and did the right thing, life would meet you halfway. That belief walked out with him that night, left behind in the empty office where his name had once mattered. At home, the silence followed him. The walls felt unfamiliar, as if they knew he had failed and were waiting for him to admit it. Bills sat unopened on the table, reminders that dignity does not pay rent. His phone stayed quiet, no messages asking if he was okay, no calls offering help. The world moved on quickly, and he learned how invisible a person can become when their title is taken away. Shame wrapped itself around him, not because he had done something wrong, but because society has a way of making loss feel like guilt. Days blurred into weeks. He searched for work with careful optimism at first, then with desperation. Each rejection carved another small wound into his confidence. He stopped telling people where he was going, stopped explaining why things hadn't worked out. It was easier to let them assume he was fine than to admit he was unraveling. Pride became his quiet enemy, keeping him isolated even when he needed help the most. But in that isolation, something unexpected began to grow. Without the constant noise of deadlines and expectations, he started noticing his own thoughts again. He remembered who he was before his worth was measured by performance reviews and job titles. He remembered the ideas he once had, the ambitions he'd buried because they didn't fit into someone else's vision. Pain has a way of stripping life down to its essentials, and in that raw space he found clarity. He began small, not with grand plans or bold announcements, but with discipline. Early mornings returned, not for someone else's schedule, but for his own survival. He learned, studied the industry from the outside this time, seeing patterns he'd missed when he was inside the machine. He listened more than he spoke. He observed how power actually worked, how decisions were made, how control often belonged to those who stayed calm while others panicked. Money was tight, humiliatingly so. There were days when he questioned whether dignity was worth the struggle, days when giving up seemed practical rather than weak. But every time that thought crept in, he remembered the silence of that hallway, the way he'd been erased without explanation. That memory became fuel, not anger but resolve. He promised himself that if he ever returned, it would be on his own terms. Opportunities began appearing in quiet forms, a short-term project no one else wanted, a consulting role with impossible expectations, a chance to fix problems others had already abandoned. He took them all. He worked without complaint, not to impress anyone, but to rebuild himself piece by piece. People started noticing the results, not the man behind them at first, but success has a way of pulling attention toward its source. Slowly, his name started circulating again, spoken with curiosity instead of pity. He didn't rush back into the spotlight. He understood now that real power doesn't announce itself, it waits, it watches, it moves when the moment is right. The industry he'd once trusted blindly now looked different to him. Fragile, political, driven by fear more than confidence. And fear, he had learned, could be managed. The company that had let him go began struggling. Decisions made in haste, leaders chosen for comfort rather than competence, cracks forming beneath polished surfaces. From a distance, he watched it all unfold without satisfaction or bitterness. He didn't need revenge. Life was already teaching its lessons. What he needed was readiness. When the call finally came, it didn't sound like an apology. It sounded like desperation wrapped in professionalism. They needed help. They needed experience. They needed someone who understood the system from the inside and the outside. They needed him. He listened calmly, letting the silence stretch just long enough to remind them of what they'd once discarded. Returning wasn't easy. Walking back into that building stirred old wounds, memories of loss and humiliation rising like ghosts. But he was not the same man who had left carrying a box. He walked in with perspective, with boundaries, with a quiet confidence that came from surviving without their approval. He wasn't there to fit in. He was there to lead. Change didn't happen overnight. Resistance met him at every turn. Some saw him as a reminder of their own mistakes, others as a threat to their comfort. But he didn't argue. He didn't force authority. He focused on results, on consistency, on fairness. He listened to voices that had long been ignored. He rewarded effort, not politics. Slowly, the atmosphere shifted. People began trusting him not because of his title, but because he understood struggle. He had been at the bottom, unseen and unheard. He knew what silence could do to a person. That knowledge shaped his leadership. He protected his team, not with words, but with actions. When mistakes happened, he fixed systems instead of blaming individuals. When success came, he shared credit generously. The same halls that once swallowed his footsteps now echoed with purpose. The silence that had broken him was replaced by a steady rhythm of progress. Those who had dismissed him watched with disbelief as he made decisions they couldn't control. He wasn't loud, he wasn't arrogant, he was simply unmovable. Control, he learned, wasn't about power over others. It was about control over oneself, over fear, over ego, over the need for validation. By losing everything, he had gained something far more valuable, freedom from dependency on approval. That freedom made him dangerous in the best possible way. As the company stabilized and then thrived, his story quietly spread beyond its walls. Not as a tale of revenge, but as proof that being forced out does not define the end. That silence does not mean weakness. That sometimes life removes you from a place not to punish you, but to prepare you. If this story is speaking to you right now, if it reminds you of your own silent battles, your own moments of being overlooked or pushed aside, please take a moment to like, share, and comment. Your engagement helps these stories reach others who may be struggling in silence too. Before the ending, here's a special request from the heart. Comment the word rise. If you believe setbacks are not the end, but the beginning of something greater. In the end, he never sought validation from those who once doubted him. He didn't need apologies or recognition. The greatest victory was internal, the knowledge that he had been broken and rebuilt himself stronger, wiser, and unshakable. The silence that once crushed him became the space where his strength was forged. He returned not as the man they remembered, but as the one in control of his life, his choices, and his future. And for the first time, the silence worked in his favor.